Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our Admissions Dean's Corner session. And today's topic will be effective interview techniques. My name is Suleima, and I am the TMDSCS Support Coordinator. And with me, I am so excited to have Dr. Elizabeth Crouch, the Assistant Dean for Professional Programs Admissions at Texas A&M University School of Veterinary Medicine and Biomedical Sciences. If you're not familiar with our sessions, these a series of sessions are to cover a variety of different topics, and it's designed specifically to help applicants get a comprehensive overview of what it takes to stand out as a competitive applicant, which is typically one of the questions we always get, rather whether you are a dental, medical, podiatry, or veterinary applicant. A lot of our applicants are wondering, what does it take for me to stand out? And so in these sessions, we will cover topics that cover the emphasizing of the importance of going beyond GPA, your test scores, so that you can present a well-rounded, authentic application. So, and we also have our Team DCS Director, Enrique Hassel, joining us as well. You'd like to say a couple words before we get started?
Yes, thank you so much for allowing me to butt in on today's conversation. We're so excited to have Dr. Crouch joining us. So, just wanted to share with everybody watching today. Dr. Crouch does represent the Texas A&M School of Veterinary Medicine and Biomedical Sciences, but I do want to share that the feedback that she's going to share is very likely going to impact all applicants across the spectrum. And so, please don't just shake off the feedback. This is definitely going to be applicable to you. And we're so happy to have her joining us to represent the school because Texas A&M is actually the school that led the way in bringing MMI interviews to the state of Texas. And so they have the most experience in working with applicants and preparing them for these different types of interviews. So the feedback that you're going to receive today not only is applicable to you, but is also tried and true. And I think it's really important for you to kind of receive the feedback with an open mind, open heart, but also acknowledge that there is a lot of expertise that is being shared with you today. And I really want our viewers to take full advantage of it. So, and of course, Dr. Crouch is an incredible colleague to work with. She has been part of several of our previous sessions, and I'm so excited to have her joining us today. So
Thank
I'm
you.
going to be quiet and go into the background and just let her do her thing. So thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Crouch.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm super excited to be here today.
Yeah, thank you so much. So to go ahead and get us started, just to let y'all know if you're not familiar with our platform or our office hours, this is your first time with us, you can always list a question into the chat and we'll answer those typically towards the end of the session. But if there's one that really stands out with the topic that we're covering, we will go ahead and present it on the screen. So if you have any questions, highly recommend, like Enrique said, it's okay if you're a dental applicant watching or a podiatry applicant, that's okay. All these techniques I think will be very relevant to you and highly useful. So go ahead and ask your questions if you have any. And so to go ahead and get us started, I would love to have you, Dr. Crouch, just give us a little bit more information about you, maybe perhaps either a fun fact or an insight into your academic journey.
Sure, absolutely. So, I am a geneticist by trade. So, that was my training. And I started working with undergraduate pre professional students over 20 years ago, and then joined the professional programs office in 2022. And you asked me a fun fact about myself. I think one thing that people probably do know about me is that I love to dance. One thing that people probably don't know about me is that I actually play the classical guitar, and I have since I was about 8 years old. And I don't do a lot of performances or anything. It's kind of more just for me, but I really enjoy that as a pastime.
I love that. I love to hear when our deans let us know, what their favorite hobbies are, or give us a little bit more insight about them. Just like you guys give advice to applicants, to be their authentic selves and talk about these in their activities. I think it's also really neat to see that how you guys are also highlighting that as part of your journey or things that you like to do. So yeah, it just personalizes it a little bit more for
It
us.
does. It does. Thank you.
Yeah, so without further ado, we'll go ahead and get started because we have a lot of information.
Yes.
So when talking about interviewing, preparing for interviews, can you give us a little bit more insight as to what our preparing stage would look like as applicants?
Sure. So, what I wanted to kind of start with was researching the institution that you're applying to, or institutions plural. And a lot of times, students have a little bit of trouble navigating that. But what I have found over the years when I'm have been helping students look at different universities is most universities at the very home page have some sort of uh, information about us, or the menu will say about us. And when you go and look at that, it will have things like their mission statement, their vision statement. You can also, just by scoping the menu items on their homepage, find different departments, find research highlights, maybe outreach highlights, big projects that they've been doing. And so, in the same way, think of it like exploring a city that you're going to visit in a foreign country. You're going to go to Europe and you want to know, what am I going to do in this city? You're kind of diving into it in the same way. What's the culture of the organization to which you're applying? And then kind of take that and start to think about the things that you've done and the things that have shaped your academic journey, and how you could give and weave in either to your essays during the application, but in this case, what we're talking about, the interviews, your some concrete examples of how you live out their vision and you live out their mission. And so, for example, I had chosen an example when I was thinking about this. Our fourth year veterinary students get to do a rotation with the Houston SPCA. So, if we had a candidate for admissions who had extensive experience with shelters and humane societies, maybe that's something that they, talk about, weave into their interview, highlight to their interviewers, knowing that that is an experience that is important to the school and has been important to them, and also put it into context. Why was it important to them? Not only, what did you learn, but what are some things that had meaning for you in those experiences? So, kind of, a lot of times when people think about an institution, they think, oh, what's their research? What's the different departments they have? What are the clinical settings? And all of that is good. Also think about all the co-curricular activities that exist. Research, are there career and externship fairs? Are there wet labs? Are there research opportunities for you as a student? How do these tie into your educational goals and outcomes? And then that's kind of your starting point for creating your story for that interview with that institution.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing that. I think it's neat to hear you say kind of like pretend like it's like a new city that you're visiting. It's also like the common sense information of, doing your research and seeing what the school has that kind of aligns with what you are interested in, and your perhaps passion areas. And so I think that's really neat of how you kind of gave us that analogy there.
Thank you. Yes. The
Yeah.
passion areas is a great way to think about it. How does this school match with your passion areas?
Definitely. And so, talking a little bit more about the mock interviews, because I know that that's something that even whenever I was researching this topic, there was a lot of information about, do mock interviews. But what if someone doesn't really um, have access to that, or, how can they develop their own mock interviews to prepare themselves?
Sure, sure. So you're right. Some universities and colleges will have a career center that does mock interviews. Sometimes home departments will do that. But if you don't have that, you can actually set up some mock interviews just with your friends. We used to do this with ourselves in grad school, um, to practice giving presentations and things like that. And so you can actually grab, a friend or two, three or four, if it's you're trying to set up a multiple mini interview, and actually do these mock sessions yourself. So one of the benefits of practice is I want people to think about this as, if you are an athlete, if you're a musician, if you're a surgeon, if you're an actor, you practice. You don't just walk on stage and start, spouting Shakespeare. You actually have dress rehearsals, and you put on the clothes that you're going to wear, and you practice those lines and the responses that you're having to people in your body language. And that creates muscle memory, and it makes those particular tasks kind of rote, so to speak, because when you go to an interview, you're going to be nervous. And so you want your natural communication style to happen within the background, so to speak. So it's going to be the background program that's running in your brain, so that you can think about the questions, you can think about engaging your interviewers. And so the biggest benefit is that it allows your body and your mouth to get used to how you're going to answer questions. The other thing is that you can set it up to mimic the types of interviews that you're going to have. So if it's going to be kind of a traditional one-on-one interview, then you can get a trusted mentor, perhaps an adult in your life, to do this for you. If it's going to be a multiple mini interview and it's going to be in person, then maybe you grab two mentors, because usually there's two interviewers in a room with these multiple mini interviews. If it's virtual, then there are ways to practice using different platforms. So any kind of platform that you can record yourself, it's real important to record yourself. It's important to see your hand gestures. For example, if people can only see you from the shoulders up, you don't want to be waving your hands or having them in front of the camera. It's okay to have some hand gestures for emphasis. You don't want to sit in a chair and swivel the whole time because you're nervous. So recording yourself is going to be very important to get some of these feedback points for yourself. And so basically just kind of make it as real as possible. Wear the clothes you're going to wear so that if they're going to work or if they're going to make you feel uncomfortable. If you have a hairstyle that is always constantly making you push your hair behind your ear or getting in your face, maybe that's something that you need to adjust. A lot of times in multiple mini interviews, you're going to have an opportunity, once you're asked a question, to take some notes for yourself and compose your thoughts. So maybe you have a pen or pencil handy that works. You have your note cards in front of you. Basically make it as real as possible. And then ask whoever is in this scenario with you to give you feedback, and also have them then repeat and do it again immediately. So kind of like that whole get back up on the horse when you fall off. Immediately do it again so that it kind of gets set in your brain, the things that you needed to correct. And then wait 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and then do it again so that you can make sure that you are actually adding those things in. You remember to add those things in, and they're beginning to become more of a habit for you.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Just as you were speaking, you were saying, your hair, or if you're moving a lot or so. I am the type of person that moves a lot in my chair. So then I was like, wait, those are things that make sense, as you're speaking. But in the moment, once you're nervous, you can easily just forget about those things. But like you said, if you practice it, you'll notice it, and then be able to do it not as often, or find other strategies to help you, maybe like a fidget toy or something, so you're not as nervous.
Exactly. Some people do hold fidget toys in their hands, especially if it's a video interview, because you can't see your hands. So that's another thing that, if you're in a person-to-person interview, that may be a little bit harder, but some people can even just like squeeze their fingers or hold on to their thumbs, or do something that kind of distracts their hands from moving a lot, if that's something that they
Hmm.
recognize as a problem. Another thing that I used to have my friends do was count all of my ums and uhs, and literally count them. They wouldn't even listen to what I was saying. They wouldn't pay attention to the answer of the presentation. They would just sit there, and as I talked, start counting all of my filler words, and then at the end tell me, and it's really it's pretty shocking and humbling when the first time you do something like that. And so, the more you practice those things, the better off you are.
Yeah, I really like that. And as you mentioned that, I was like, let me let me think about the times that I've done that too. Yeah, like we're all learning here. I'm also learning as well.
Yes, same. Well, and my chair, it swivels, so that's always my habit, is to sit and swivel. So that's the one I have to overcome.
Mhm. Alrighty, so definitely great insight. Thank you so much. And so as we're going in a little bit more in depth about the topic, and articulating our vision and experiences. So whenever we get these questions, how can we communicate that effectively across?
Yes. So one of the methods that, and as you say, I did a little research on this. So this is certainly not my acronym. This is something that's fairly, ubiquitous if you Google good interview techniques. But they call it the STAR method of interviewing, and basically that's going to stand for situation, task, action, and result. And so, what you're basically doing is your storytelling. You can kind of focus yourself in on the question by, in some ways, repeating the question or stating what you have heard the situation to be, then kind of give people, okay, these are the tasks. This is how I would take care of this situation that you're asking about. These are the actions that I would take, and these would be the potential results of those actions. So a lot of interviews nowadays are very situational. They're trying to bring out people's critical thinking skills, not only their communication, but how they communicate when they are thinking on their feet, ethical reasoning. Maybe they'll provide you a conundrum that you have to think through and provide an answer that would demonstrate ethical reasoning or cultural competence in a certain situation. And they're looking for empathy. Can you put yourself in somebody else's shoes and then respond accordingly? And so when you respond, sometimes it's difficult because it's not just a simple tell me about yourself, which we all can talk about ourselves. It's a little bit more of a, well, what would you do if or when? And so you're thinking about what you would do, and then you're trying to figure out how to communicate that back. So that STAR method is a great way to practice that storytelling, to set up your story, tell them what you would do, and then tell them what you think the results would be. So a good, I kind of give examples when I'm talking to students. So one example you might be, tell me about a time when you're required to organize a project. What was your role and what did you learn about your leadership style? So you would tell them the situation. What was the project? What was your role? These are the tasks I had to do. What did you learn about your leadership style? Well, in doing these tasks, X, Y, and Z happened. These were the results of that, and this is what I learned. So it gives you concrete examples. You'd use a lot of I statements. Um, don't forget the why. So a lot of questions say, what would you do and why? You haven't fully answered the question if you don't tell them why. Just telling them what you would do does not give them an insight into your thought processes. And so if that particular question was trying to get at critical thinking, and you don't know, I mean, they just ask a question, but they have a rubric they're working off of. So if you don't answer the question fully, then you're leaving points on the table that you could gain from actually making sure that each and every part of that question is answered.
Yeah, and I like this method because this is not the first time we've heard one of our deans mention the STAR method, and being able to use that to kind of help you with your responses and your overall narrative, which is a theme that I've been noticing lately in a lot of our sessions, and even the way that we approach. The way that we let the applicants know the information that they should think about whenever they're entering into their application is thinking about that overall narrative, what they want to communicate to the schools. And I think just hearing this again, and it just reiterates that how important it is to start thinking about those things, and like perhaps even thinking about this earlier on in their application and just already kind of going through it and making sure that what they are listing is going to be something that they can use to kind of like answer these questions like in this STAR method format. So I already had my wheels turning.
Yes, right. And that's another thing they can do when
Mhm.
leading into, say, a mock interview, is actually look up a bunch of questions. You can just Google MMI questions, you can Google interview questions, and then some platforms will even give you, this is an example of a good answer, so you
Yeah.
can see how dense the answer is, but succinct and to the point. The other thing that you might consider doing, and so when I was brainstorming this session, I was thinking, how would I think about boiling all of my experiences down into something, that could fit in a 4-minute, answer. And one of the things that you might consider doing, because this helps you put your experiences particularly into context, is when you're looking at those multiple mini interview questions, or you're looking at the, types of interview questions that you might be asked, even if they're one-on-one, be thinking about tying your experiences into the sorts of questions. So with the example I just gave, what did you learn about your leadership? Well, we've all had leadership experiences, but those experiences look different for each of us. So you can very much personalize that and answer the question. So the question is always going to have a little bit of open-endedness so that you can, personalize that. The other thing you might do is write your own letter of recommendation, because the only way these individuals that are interviewing you is through this conversation that y'all are having. A lot of interviews are blinded to the application itself, so they haven't read your essays, they don't know what you are, what you have said or what you have put down about your grades or anything else. And so think of this as making your first impression, and then telling them who you are, brag on yourself. We spend all our lives having our parents say, oh, be humble. But this is the one time that I don't want you to be humble. I want you to actually, brag on yourself. And so if you write your own letter of rec, nobody's ever going to see it. You just write it. And then the last paragraph should be a summary statement of all these things that you've just told somebody about yourself. That's your elevator speech. And so those are probably the things that you're wanting to highlight in some way, shape, or form.
I like that. And I totally relate to that last part that you mentioned. Alrighty, so moving on, and you already kind of touched on this a little bit about the different formats, virtual and in person, especially with COVID-19 a couple years back, that really changed the game. And I remember seeing how the schools were getting adjusted and all these new insights and tips about interviewing online. So can you give us a little bit more information about those types of interviews?
Sure, absolutely. So interviewing virtually is not so different than interviewing in person. In all interviews, you want to dress professionally. You can even look up, what is the definition of business? And, they'll actually give you example clothing and things like that. So what's business dress? What's business casual? But dress professionally. When you, as I've said, when you practice, wear the clothes that you're going to wear so that you feel comfortable about that. We've already talked about filler words. The STAR method, another thing that's good in interviews, or good to practice for interviews, oftentimes, particularly if it is not an MMI situation, which is slightly different, if you're in kind of a one-on-one or 1-to-2 interview, and it is a guided interview through questions from your interviewer rather than an MMI where it's a little bit more scenario based, a lot of times you can be asked a negative question. So an example, what is your greatest weakness? And I always found those interesting as a young person, kind of starting out, as I thought, why do you want me to tell you the things that I don't like about myself? Like what kind of question is that? And people tend to skirt it. They they tend to say, oh, well, people tell me I give too much to the team and I need to take better care of myself. That doesn't, what I hear on when somebody says that is that perhaps you don't have good time management skills, and you're somebody that has not figured out, the wellness and taking care of yourself. So you think that you're spinning it as a positive, and you really kind of aren't. So instead, choosing something that you're actively improving on, that you can give a concrete example or an identified task that you did, the action you took to correct that, and just kind of couch it as a learning experience, because we all are learning things, right? And so it is okay if they ask you kind of what we call, quote unquote, a negative question, to be honest about that, but make sure that you're using an example where there was a positive outcome. You overcame something, or you learned, what you needed to learn. So those are some just general hints. And like I said, they apply to everything, in person or virtual. And then both of these formats, the MMI and the traditional, could be in either in person or virtual. So you kind of have all the different combinations that you could come up with. So again, not so unlike each other, body language is going to be important. It's just going to be slightly different. So if I walk into a room, because it's an in-person one, then I'm going to want to shake people's hands. I want to look them in the eye. I want to, sit up in my chair. You don't want to be, tapping your fingers and things like that. Each person that you interview with is a chance for an impression. And so make sure that you don't warmly greet the first person that you see in the room and then kind of quickly shake everybody else's hands. Each person, take your time. I'm meeting you. I'm so happy to be here. In a virtual setting, it's a little bit harder to do your body language, but you can, lean forward if you're telling somebody something that's really exciting. You maybe raise your hands till they're in the camera just slightly for something that you want to emphasize, things like that. So you can still have body language, but again, that's why recording yourself and kind of watching that language really helps if you're going to be in that, virtual setting. Another hint is to open up the camera beforehand and look at what your background is. If you're going to come in and they're just going to have your name on the screen first, what is that name going to be? Make sure that it, says something that you want it to say, and not just the lead into your email. So just little things like that can make a difference.
Yes, I like that so much. And that actually reminded me we have a article in our newsroom. So I'm just going to paste it into the chat really quickly. Interview article. We had this come out a couple years ago, but we keep on updating to make sure the information is relevant. But as soon as you said the virtual background, I immediately thought about this article because we give tips and tricks on how to make sure you have a good, nice background like the one that I have. And
Right,
we have even a
exactly.
couple ones that you can even just like click on and save as for your background. So just something that I thought about really quickly because I know that we have, for example, like in Teams, we have like that nice living room background. But some if you don't have that, then if it's like on Zoom or another virtual platform, you can always get one of those to help you look a little
Yeah,
bit more
I think
professional.
that's real important, and that's something that we learned as professors when we were teaching during COVID, and with everybody zooming in. The you don't really think about the room that you're sitting in until you see it on the screen, and so because you're used to looking at it, and so just kind of turn around and say, if grandma was going to come in and see this space that I'm sitting in, would it be pleasing? And or if I was going to entertain the mayor of my town, is this what I want them to see? Because this is your time, obviously, to put your best foot forward.
Definitely, definitely. And I'm thinking back to Zoom for school and a lot of interesting backgrounds. We saw
Yes.
pets.
Yes.
Alrighty. And I already see we have a question. We're almost done with this presentation, so if y'all have any questions, fear not, go ahead and ask those questions. We'll be here to answer them, and I'm so excited to see what kind of answers we get. So you already spoke a little bit about this, and A&M is known for having their multiple interviews. Can you give us a little bit more information about multiple mini interviews? Because whenever we had a couple questions around this time of the year in previous cycles, we got a lot of questions about what are the MMIs. And it was an interesting acronym. We had to look it up.
Yes, yes. So yeah, and that's one of the things that I think happens in any industry is we get to talking in acronyms, and if you're not familiar with it, it makes it very hard to follow things. So MMI stands for multiple mini interviews, and just like the name says, whether you're in person or virtual, what is going to happen is you're going to have a set of stations, and typically they are, most schools that I've talked to, it's going to be between 6 and 8. Sometimes it's as few as 4 or 5. And at those different stations, each station is typically going to have 2 interviewers present and or grading. So if it's virtual and it's asynchronous, which is what we do, then the student will record their interview in a platform, and then each station or each video, which is considered a station, is going to be graded by 2 separate individuals. And so the nice thing about multiple mini interviews is if, for example, at Texas A&M, we have 6 stations. If you have 2 individuals grading each of those stations, then you have 12 individuals giving you a score. And so it kind of normalizes people's scores. It, with 12 different individuals, like I said, that's 12 first impressions. So each time that somebody is opening up that video, because we do them asynchronous, then it's the first time that they've seen you. It is a chance for you to make an impression. The other thing that is nice about it is sometimes when we've been in interviews, if you've interviewed for a job before, for example, maybe somebody asked you a question that you afterwards thought, oh, I wish I hadn't answered it that way, or I wish I'd had a better thought about how to answer that. And so if you have 6 stations and you kind of have one that you don't feel so good about, you've got 5 others. And each of those 5 others have 2 more individuals to give you scores. So it really gives you a lot of chances, which we really like. In our case, also with it being asynchronous, one of the things that we feel is a plus is that the interview graders are going to be fresh. So each time that they are reviewing videos, they can be fresh. They can be in a setting where, if they need to take a break, they can take a break. And the other thing is they can rewatch it. So if they are using their rubric and they think, gosh, I don't know if this person actually said that, then they can rewatch it. So the multiple mini interview format has a lot of pluses. You have 2 people listening. So if one person hears something that the other one doesn't, then, particularly if it's in a live setting, then you have kind of a backup basically, and somebody can say, oh no, they said that, I heard it. So we like this form of interviewing just because of the chances that it gives the interviewee or the applicant to make a good impression and to, kind of show us what they can do in these different situations that are presented. So that's kind of the format. Some things that are important when you're doing the multiple mini interviews. If you are doing it on a platform, so if you're doing it through a platform where you're either it's live and you're going to be for example, virtually hopping into different Zoom rooms, for example, or it's on a platform and you're going to record yourself because it's asynchronous, make sure you know the time zone. So Texas is a big state. And so a lot of times we as administrators get in a rut of thinking, oh, this person is applying and they're from Texas. They may not be from Texas, or maybe you're applying to an out-of-state school. And if they say, on August 1st at 3 p.m., you're going to have your interview, make sure that you know the time zone that they're in. And particularly if it's a neighboring state, because sometimes the time zones change and you don't realize it. So if you have to, just use your phone and look it up, but make sure you log in at the right time. That's kind of a common problem that we see. Again, practice your questions and your answers when you're setting up these practices. Have your friends ask you questions that you have not looked up. If they're asking you questions that you've looked up, that's a great way to practice kind of your mannerisms, but it is not a great way to force yourself to think on your feet. So ask questions that you haven't heard before. Another thing that we say to remember is to answer all parts of questions, which I've said, but then once you've done that, be finished. Don't keep going, especially in an asynchronous platform. You're given 2 minutes to read the question, think about your answer, jot down some notes. Don't make your notes so extensive you can't read them, because that's not going to do any good for you. And then to answer your question, you have about 4 minutes to record yourself. If you're done at 3, be finished at 3. Otherwise, you become kind of loopy and you start saying the same things over and over again, and that detracts from the impression that you're giving the person that's grading your or listening to your interview. And then also make sure, don't forget, give concrete examples. Don't say, well, people do this or one would do this. Make it about you. I would do this. I would make this choice. And that's going to be real important because you're trying to tell them what you would do. And you can even highlight, if the question is, something that is asking how you would treat a friend, then you can even kind of set that up and say, these are things that I would want to do if I was putting myself in their place, kind of lead into that empathy or lean into some of the other things that that people are kind of trying to get at in these interview questions.
Yeah, thank you so much. And very helpful. And so I think this would also, like we mentioned, is applicable for other schools as well. And just the different types of ways that you can have these multiple minute interviews. Just really great insight. Thank you so much.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
All right. And now we're ready for questions, y'all. So if we can just go really quickly and look at the questions that we have. All righty. All right, so we have our first question. This is from Sahar. What is the usual time limit per applicant and number of questions in a typical interview?
Okay, great question. So if we're talking about multiple mini interviews, typically a time limit is going to be between 4 and 6 minutes. And if you haven't ever talked for 4 minutes, it's a lot longer than you think. And so that's another thing that is sometimes difficult for students, is to make sure that you're giving enough of an answer. So set a timer on your phone and answer the question for 4 minutes and see what that sounds like, and see if you're starting to circle around. You probably want to land at anywhere, 2+ minutes, to be able to give a good, succinct answer. And the other thing is to make sure that you're quote unquote making eye contact. So I've heard of students putting a picture of their mom next to their camera, or stick a teddy bear up there, or something, but make sure that when you're talking, and if you start to think and you can actually say, let me collect my thoughts, or give me a second, and then collect your thoughts and then keep talking. But don't, start wandering around, because that, if a client was standing in front of you, you wouldn't be doing that. So pretend that there's somebody in front of you that you can actually look at.
That's definitely a great point. Okay, follow-up question number two. So how many effective stories should one have prepared to weave into their questions?
So repeat that again, so just so I make sure that I
Yeah.
understand.
How many effective stories should one have prepared to weave into their questions? I'm assuming this is more like what kind of scenarios or
Mhm.
stories I can have ready at hand for any of these kind of questions that would be asked of.
Right. So that's going to be difficult. And the reason I say that is there is also going to be a tendency for you to prepare some of your stories beforehand, and you think of some really good ones that you really hope that you're going to be able to use. And it would be a common mistake for students to then try to fit that story into a question just because they wanted to make sure it was out there, even though it's not answering the question. So it's real important that yes, you have some in your back pocket, but by that same token, you may not be asked something that any of them fit into. And so you'll also, have to think on your feet a little bit. I think though that the more you think about your personality traits and your characteristics, and what I like to talk about are your gifts. What are your skills? What are the things that you're really good at? Those things are applicable across multiple situations. And so rather than thinking of a specific instance or time that something happened, I mean, that's great because if you can use it, great, you can give a concrete example, but also think more higher layer, are you a dedicated worker? Are you a curious learner? Are you um, culturally competent in multiple cultural situations? You know, and then, depending on what they ask, you can highlight that characteristic by using an example. And that's going to probably serve you better than having, oh, this time that I was studying abroad and this happened to me. That's great. And if something fits, then perfect. But if it doesn't, then you're kind of left high and dry. So think a little bit more about characteristics. Does that answer the question a little better?
I think so. If I were asking the question, that would have definitely addressed my question.
Okay.
Just
Okay.
just
Wonderful.
if I was in the student's shoes, I would definitely yeah, I guess that is one of those things that when you're interviewing, you want to be prepared in a way whenever they ask you a situation, you would be able to pull from one of your experiences. But I really like how you said think of it a little differently instead of having that story ready, have like the characteristics or your competencies in a story that can back that one up. Because
Right.
that's what the schools are looking for.
Right, right. Yeah.
Mhm,
So they're interviewing you to be their future colleague. And
mhm.
every colleague wants, somebody that's empathetic, culturally competent, good, strong communicator. So what are some things that you can tell them that convince them of that?
Great point. Definitely. I also wanted to highlight one of this comment that we received whenever you were mentioning about, don't, and then Yvonne will talk about this, but I think your tip to stop talking whenever you have said what you have to say is great. Some find silence uncomfortable and always want to fill it. If the
Mhm.
interview is live, it allows follow-up questions.
Right. It does allow follow up questions. It allows your interviewer to think as well. Maybe you said something that was impactful to them and they're letting it settle. It also allows you to think, and that's okay. So being comfortable with silence is it's hard. It is so hard, and I have had to practice it even in my teaching. It's I ask a question and there's silence, and it's really hard not to say, okay, well the answer is this, and so it being comfortable with the silence. I think you're absolutely right, Yvonne. It takes um, it takes a little bit of practice, but the more you can practice it, the better you get at it. And actually, it calms you. And I know that sounds weird because it's uncomfortable, so it's counterintuitive. But as you get used to it, it really does take it down a notch because you give yourself the space to think and you give others the space to think.
Exactly. Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that, definitely. And I've experienced it before in school as well, in graduate studies. And that's the thing of discussion. It's like, okay, be okay feeling uncomfortable with the silence.
Right.
It's actually helpful.
It is actually helpful.
Okay, and so kind of swinging it back to, the context of the interview, and you've already mentioned a good tip for us. Don't think so much about like the story. Think about the characteristic that you want to talk about, and then have your story ready for that. So, in a situation in which an applicant wants to use like the STAR method to be able to kind of give context about their application, how it could be helpful for them if they have, let's say, We have a question here actually about that. So, how would schools look at upward trends? So, for instance, if you have a 3.75 cumulative GPA and 3.6 for the science GPA or BCPM, but 54 credit hours of at a 4.0. So, I'm basically the bottom line with this question is how can one talk about that upward trend in their interviews in the context of like that STAR method that you gave us information about?
Right. So I think everybody has an academic story and an academic journey. And some people, it is kind of, most people think of it as linear. I go in as a freshman and I do XYZ and I graduate and I apply and and that is so few of us actually really have that journey. So think about your academic journey as just that, as an academic journey. There may have been some circles, there may have been some ups, there's some downs. And as you part of your academic journey is, well, it's multifold. It's learning how to study. So all of us have to learn how to study. We have to learn what our best methods are and then learn how to apply those. It is learning how to ask for help and learning to work in a team environment, which is a positive. Everybody wants somebody who is a team player on their team. It is also learning what your gifts and your skills are. So a lot of people in an academic advising setting will ask about easy courses or easy majors or hard majors and and I always try to reframe that, because that is in the eye of the beholder, very much so. And it all depends on what our loves are, what our passions are, where our gifts lie. And so what's hard for me may be very easy for you and vice versa. So nobody's academic journey is going to be the same. And so again, like you say, using that STAR method, what was the situation that you started at your academic journey? What were your tasks at hand? I had to learn how to do X. I had to learn how to do Y. I changed my time management here. I had to change this there. And then how did you do that? You didn't just wake up one morning and said, I'm going to change process is never clean. It's sometimes messy. Usually we need help. So what were the actions that you took? And then what were the results of that? And where are you now? And how did you, get to this, point in your journey, which is going to continue? You're asking these people to continue your journey, right? You're asking to go to professional school. So telling that story is important, because everybody will again go through a growth phase in professional school. And so how you do growth and how you do change is very relevant to that application process.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I definitely think this is very helpful. So thank you, Hope Mana, for asking this question, because this is something that we usually hear about the upward trend and talking about that in interviews. But I also really like how you pointed out to, you know, talking about your growth aspect, because I know that that's something that the schools very like value a lot.
Mhm.
And sometimes it can be easy to just forget, like, well, I'm here now. We don't want to talk about that mess.
Right. Yeah, that was a mess. Don't want to talk about it. But,
Yeah.
you know, growth mindset is important. I mean, and it continues to be important your whole life. I mean, you are asking to be in a profession, any of the professions that are applying through this TMDSES platform, you're asking to be in a profession that you're going to be a lifelong learner. And we hope for you to be a lifelong learner, and we want for you to be a lifelong learner. And so that growth mindset and those growth processes are very important parts of who we are.
Definitely agree. So, talking a little bit more about experiences. So, here we have a question from Tatiana. When sharing our experience and giving examples, is it best to be general rather than specific, such as giving names in the given situation?
That's a good question. So I would probably not give names. You never know who knows whom. And so if there's a specific situation, you can say a person, a friend, a colleague, a fellow student. And I think what's important in the situation is not the other who's that are in the situation, but
Mm.
how you reacted to that situation. So I think you can be specific, but also be cognizant of what your story is. The other thing is you want to make sure you don't place blame. So it doesn't do you any good to say, this happened to me and it was so and so's fault, but this is how I responded. It Because it takes a little bit away from your response to the situation. If you are putting the blame on others, you can respond to a situation and respond to reality and life without blaming others. Also, be real careful actually of saying that but statement, because the
Mm.
word but tends to negate everything before it. And so make sure that whatever you want to say, that you are saying it, you're saying it succinctly, but then don't, counterpoint yourself and don't negate what you just said by saying this, but say this and this and this, and these are the things that I did.
I like that. Yeah, that's definitely a good point to think about, even as we're answering questions in the interview. Great point.
Mhm.
We have another question. So this is usually about the questions that are asked. So, are there any unusual slash odd questions that one can expect? Any examples of unusual questions? How to answer one if one doesn't know how to exactly answer the question?
Right. So I don't think that if there is an odd question, I don't think it's going to be on purpose. In other words, you can't, when creating interview questions, you can't assume how everyone is going to respond to that interview question, right? You're trying to make a question that, the majority of people are going to be able to answer, maybe have some context for. And so I wouldn't say that nobody's trying to trick you. They're just trying to find out about you. So that's the other thing is to calm your nerves. Don't go into it thinking, oh, these people are trying to trick me. They're trying to uh, see how I can think on my feet by tripping me up, and then how am I going to respond? These people are actually really trying to be friendly. They're trying to create a situation where you can be at ease so that you can actually communicate with them and they can find some things out from you, rather than having to kind of pull teeth and pull answers out of you. And so that's the first thing. The other thing is a lot of your multiple mini interview questions, for example, they're not going to be specific to your profession. The professional school is going to teach you what they want you to know. So nobody's going to sit down and say, tell me about 6 different surgical knots and how you would, you know, it's going to be things that are universal and that any of us could see, hear, or have experienced. And then how would you handle those situations? So they're going to be a little bit more generic, a little bit more holistic in their nature. And so I don't think you're going to get the weird. Now, you may be asked, what would you do in situation X? And you have absolutely no context for that. You're like, I've never seen that. I've never experienced it. And so in those situations, it would be perfectly fine to say, something like, I have not had an experience with that. And if I did,
Mm.
pretend what would happen if you saw this? What would happen if you heard this or you overheard that? How would you respond to that? What would you like to think that you would do in those situations? And all of us can be a little bit of the actor or the pretender and say, okay, if I was in this situation, what would I do? And so that's what I would focus on if you are finding that you do not have context for the type of question that's being asked.
I like that. Just because I know that whenever you're asked a question and you're not sure or you're blanking out, and I think that's really helpful. Well, I would have done this, and like you said,
Mhm.
not the but like and.
Right.
Really great tool. I already like that already.
Yeah.
And another thing that you mentioned, which I love that you said this, by the way, that the schools are not out to get applicants or trying to trick them or, just to see if they can think on quickly on their feet like that. I really like that because I know that sometimes for applicants it can be intimidating, and if they mess up one thing or they maybe had an error, like that's it, they're out to get them. They're gonna toss out their application. I really like how you counter that because that's the my line that I say with applicants is, the schools are not out here to get you. They're not trying to see where you mess up. So thank you for reiterating that. I can confidently say that a dean definitely backs me up on that.
Yeah, they're not out to get you. And, and especially either, if you're doing serial interviews or you have the multiple mini interview format, if you don't like the way you answered a question, they'll give you 2-3 minutes in the multiple mini interviews. And in serial interviews, sometimes it's 15 minutes. It's, go get a glass of water, those kinds of things. But use that time to calm yourself again and realize that the next person that you're meeting wasn't in on the first thing that you've just said. And so it's a whole new first impression, whole new set of people. So just, be still about it. You can't change the answer you just gave, move forward and, do your best on the next thing.
Thank you. I do want to be considerate of everyone's time. We have a couple minutes left of the hour, but I would really like to have this question for you to answer for us, just
Sure.
because we're talking about the different schools and making sure that you are catering to the tailoring your questions and your responses to the schools that you're interested in applying to. So, how important is it to tailor my responses to align with the values and mission of the school, and how can I do this effectively?
I think it is important. I think people are looking for fit, and I also think that it's important for you. That's one reason you do the background research on your schools, because this interview process is for you as well. You are going to spend the next 4 years or however many years. Sometimes people do internships, residencies at the same institution, so you're going to put some time into this institution. And so you want to be able to align your passions with their passions. And so use this time not only for them to get to know you, but for you to get to know them. I also think it's really important to have specific examples, and kind of like we said earlier, um, if you find out that there's an experience that they have, like I use the SPCA experience example, that is with which you have a lot of experience or with you have a lot of passion, then that is definitely something that can be woven in. Because in a traditional interview format, one that is a little bit less situational, they may say, what do you like about our school? What attracted you to apply to us? And those are some stories that you can work in. The other thing is that sometimes their vision statements of a school are going to be very broad. So one of our vision statements is serving every Texan every day. So what does that mean to you? If I just said to you, you're applying to our school, serving every Texan every day, what does that mean? That can mean so many different things. And that's one reason it's a vision statement, right? You can have research, you could have clinics, you can have all sorts of things, that outreach that go into that. But providing specific examples in your mind ahead of time that you can give to align with their vision statements, with their mission statements. There are medical schools that have a goal of working and providing for veterans, for example. Maybe that really speaks to you. Maybe that's something that gets woven in. So, so doing that background research, kind of like we talked about at the top of the hour, is going to be really nice and important to weave into your interview.
Thank you for sharing that. And overall, just thank you so much for the words of wisdom here that you gave us and all these tips and tricks. I'm also learned. And thank you so much for your time. It was just been wonderful just hearing everything you've had to say, and just knowing how this is going to be something that our applicants can go to. I don't think we've had something like this so in depth. So thank you so much for your time. And lastly,
You're
before we
welcome.
go, is there any last words of wisdom that you have for applicants and during this journey?
I think the best thing that I could really tell anybody is to be themselves. We really we want to see who you are and not a cookie cutter. And so I think being yourself is the most important thing.
I love that. Thank you so much.
Thank
Well,
you.
yeah, thank you so much. And just to let everyone know, we will have one more session about the Admissions Dean's Corner series next week, next Tuesday at 12, and that topic will be student wellness. So stay tuned for that. Look out for those announcements. Subscribe to our channel if you haven't already so that you never miss out our next future and upcoming videos. Thank you so much, and we'll see y'all
Thank
next
you.
time.
Y'all have a great day.
Bye.
Bye.